I am Kendra, 35 years old, and my sister took my daughter to buy a holiday gift, but came back alone. Oops, she smirked, tossing her designer bags on the counter. I left her at Target. My mother laughed, claiming my 7-year-old was getting too much attention anyway. They abandoned my child simply because my grandfather called her his favorite at brunch. I did not scream. I did not cry. I made one phone call to my grandfather. 30 minutes later, my sister was sobbing on the floor, and my mother had lost all color in her face. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your child from your own toxic family. Growing up in our sprawling suburban home just outside Atlanta, Thanksgiving was never about gratitude. It was a highly orchestrated theatrical performance where my mother Vivian acted as the lead director. My younger sister Tasha was always the undeniable star of the show, and I was relegated to the role of unpaid stagehand. Today was absolutely no different from any other holiday we had endured over the past 3 decades. The air in the massive, impeccably clean gourmet kitchen was thick and heavy with the rich, savory scents of our traditional family meal. A massive smoked turkey was roasting in the oven, a huge pan of baked macaroni and cheese rested on the counter, and a giant pot of collard greens had been simmering on the stove since 6 o'clock this morning. At 35 years old, I had built a life I was deeply proud of. As the vice president of wealth management at a prestigious financial firm, I spent my weekdays confidently negotiating multi-million-dollar portfolios and advising some of the wealthiest clients in the city. Yet the absolute second I crossed the threshold of my mother's house, my degrees and my corporate title meant nothing. I was immediately demoted back to the family scapegoat, expected to chop, stir, and serve in the sweltering kitchen while the golden child rested in the living room. Vivian sat perched elegantly on a velvet bar stool at the mahogany kitchen island. Her perfectly manicured hands were wrapped tightly around a crystal glass of expensive Chardonnay. She wore a silk emerald blouse that probably cost more than the first car I had to buy for myself, and she offered a continuous biting commentary on my cooking technique. She reminded me sharply to ensure the seasoning on the greens was exactly right, because Tasha's husband Connor was accustomed to fine dining. She explicitly stated that we needed to make Connor feel welcome, ensuring he experienced an authentic high-class Southern holiday. I gripped the handle of my heavy chef's knife a little tighter, slicing through a bunch of leafy greens with methodical, rhythmic precision. I had learned a very long time ago that arguing with Vivian was completely futile. It was like pouring water into a bottomless pit, serving only to drain my own emotional energy. Tasha had conveniently volunteered to leave the house 2 hours earlier to avoid any actual labor. She claimed she urgently needed to run to the massive super Target down the highway. Her excuse was that she had to pick up a specialized holiday greeting card and a last-minute gift for Grandpa Elijah. My 7-year-old daughter Aaliyah had begged to tag along with her aunt. Aaliyah is a fiercely bright, joyful child with a beautiful gap-toothed smile and a loud, infectious laugh that usually fills any room she enters. Earlier that morning, at our pre-Thanksgiving brunch, Grandpa Elijah had sat Aaliyah gently on his knee. He handed her a shiny silver dollar, kissed her forehead, and loudly declared to the entire room that she was his absolute favorite great-granddaughter. I saw the immediate flash of bitter, ugly jealousy cross Tasha's face, right in that moment. Tasha had always needed to be the absolute center of the universe, and being upstaged by a 7-year-old child did not sit well with her incredibly fragile ego. But when Tasha offered to take Aaliyah to the store with her, I honestly thought nothing of it. I naively assumed it was a rare, genuine moment of aunt and niece bonding. The heavy oak front door suddenly swung open, sending a gust of crisp autumn wind blowing through the grand foyer. Tasha strutted into the house, her expensive heels clicking loudly and aggressively against the polished hardwood floors. She was laughing loudly over her shoulder at Connor, who was already settling comfortably into the living room leather recliner to watch the holiday football game. Tasha walked directly into the kitchen and dropped 3 large, heavy shopping bags onto the pristine marble counter. I noticed immediately that they were not red and white Target bags. They were premium branded bags from the luxury boutiques located in the upscale outdoor shopping plaza right next to the retail store. I wiped my hands carefully on my apron and looked past her toward the long hallway. I waited to see Aaliyah skip into the room with her usual boundless energy, eager to show me whatever small toy she had convinced her aunt to buy her. But the hallway remained completely empty. The house was devoid of the familiar sound of my daughter's footsteps. A cold, deeply unsettling sensation began to pool at the very base of my stomach. I stepped away from the stove, the intense heat of the boiling pot suddenly feeling a million miles away. "Where is Aaliyah?" I asked, my voice completely level. I was assuming my daughter had perhaps run into the living room to greet her grandfather, or was simply taking off her coat by the door. Tasha did not even bother to look at me. She reached casually into one of her luxury shopping bags, pulling out a small velvet jewelry box to inspect her latest expensive purchase. She examined her reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window, fluffing her perfectly blown-out hair with her free hand. "Oops," Tasha said, a cruel, undeniable smirk playing on her painted lips. "I left her at Target." The kitchen went entirely silent. The only sound left in the room was the gentle bubbling of the boiling water on the stove. I stared at my younger sister, waiting for the punchline, waiting for Aaliyah to jump out from behind the massive kitchen island yelling surprise. But Tasha just kept looking admiringly at her new jewelry, completely unbothered by the words that had just left her mouth. "What do you exactly mean you left her?" I demanded, taking a slow step toward her. The heavy chef's knife was still resting on the wooden cutting board right beside me. Tasha rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out an exaggerated, exasperated sigh, as if I were bothering her with a trivial, annoying complaint. "I told her to wait by the toy aisle while I went to look at something in the plaza next door," she explained with chilling casualness. "When I went back to get her an hour later, she was gone. She is probably just wandering around somewhere crying. She was being a total brat in the car, anyway, bragging the whole ride about how Grandpa Elijah loves her more than anyone else in the family. I figured a little time alone in the massive store would finally teach her a good lesson about humility." My breath caught sharply in my throat. My brain frantically struggled to process the sheer terrifying magnitude of the malice in her words. She had intentionally abandoned my 7-year-old daughter in a massive crowded retail store on one of the absolute busiest shopping days of the entire year. And she had done it simply because she was jealous of a child receiving innocent affection from our elderly grandfather. Before I could even formulate a rational response, Vivian chuckled. A deep, throaty laugh of genuine amusement bubbled up from my mother's chest. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive Chardonnay, her eyes locking onto mine with a look of absolute twisted triumph. "Good," Vivian said, waving her wine glass dismissively in the air. "The brat was getting way too much attention anyway. You spoil her entirely too much, Kendra. She desperately needs to learn some independence. A few hours alone in a store builds strong character. You should be thanking your sister for doing you a massive favor instead of standing there glaring at her." The sheer toxicity of that horrific statement, the utter and complete disregard for the basic safety of her own grandchild, shattered any remaining fragile illusion I had left about my family. This was not normal sibling rivalry. This was not a harsh, misguided parenting lesson. This was pure, unadulterated cruelty. The terrifying image of Aaliyah, small, alone, and terrified, wandering the endless towering aisles of a giant superstore, searching frantically for an aunt who had deliberately driven away, struck me with the intense force of a physical blow. Panic, raw, primal, and visceral, seized my chest like a vice. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, completely drowning out the sickening sound of my mother's callous laughter. I did not waste a single precious second arguing with women who clearly possessed absolutely no conscience or moral compass. I did not scream or throw things in a fit of dramatic rage. The primal, overwhelming instinct of a mother needing to protect her young completely overrode my anger in that fleeting moment. I ripped my apron off and dropped it right onto the pristine kitchen floor. I snatched my car keys from the decorative ceramic bowl by the front door, my hands trembling violently with a potent mixture of sheer terror and boiling rage. I sprinted out the front door, leaving it wide open to the freezing November wind. I completely ignored the sound of Vivian yelling at me from the kitchen to close the door because I was letting a terrible draft into her perfect, expensive house. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my SUV, my mind focused entirely and exclusively on a single burning objective. I had to find my daughter right now. The reckoning for what they had just done would absolutely come later, and I promised myself in that cold car that it would be absolutely devastating. I did not grab my coat. I did not grab my purse. I only snatched my car keys from the foyer table and slammed the heavy oak door behind me. The cold November wind hit my bare arms, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins burned hotter than any fire. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my Range Rover and hit the ignition. The engine roared to life, matching the frantic pounding of my heart. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned a bruised, ashy white. Backing out of Vivian's pristine circular driveway, my tires squealed against the pavement, leaving dark rubber streaks on her perfectly manicured concrete. I did not care. I hit the gas, merging onto the main road with a singular, terrifying focus. Target was 4 miles away. 4 miles of stoplights, holiday traffic, and agonizing hypotheticals. My mind played a cruel loop of every horrible news story, every worst-case scenario a mother could conjure. I wove through the sluggish suburban traffic, my horn blaring, ignoring the angry gestures of other drivers. They were worried about arriving late to their Thanksgiving dinners. I was fighting for my daughter's life. The parking lot was an absolute nightmare of holiday shoppers. I did not bother looking for a valid spot. I drove my SUV straight over the yellow curb, parking it diagonally across the fire lane right in front of the massive red sliding doors. I left the hazard lights flashing through the car and park and sprinted toward the entrance. The sliding doors parted, and the wall of warm cinnamon-scented holiday air hit me alongside the cheerful, oblivious sound of festive retail music. The contrast between the joyful atmosphere and the ice-cold terror in my chest made me nauseous. I ran past the registers, my eyes scanning the sea of holiday shoppers. I flagged down a team member in a red shirt, demanding the location of the security office. The young man took one look at my face, dropped his box of merchandise, and pointed toward a set of double doors near the front restrooms. I threw the heavy wooden doors open without knocking. The security office was small, smelling faintly of old coffee and floor wax. And right there, sitting in an oversized rolling chair, with her feet dangling high above the floor, was my 7-year-old baby girl. Aaliyah was clutching a half-empty bottle of water. Her face was streaked with dried tears, her dark curls slightly frizzy from rubbing her eyes. The moment she saw me, she dropped the water bottle. It hit the linoleum floor with a dull thud, water spilling everywhere, but neither of us cared. She launched herself out of the chair and collided into my legs. I fell to my knees, wrapping my arms around her small, shaking body. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I left Vivian's kitchen. She was safe. She was whole. She was breathing. The security guard, a kind older woman with silver hair, offered me a box of tissues. She explained they had found Aaliyah wandering near the electronics section, crying for her aunt. I thanked the guard, my voice trembling with a mixture of profound relief and simmering rage. I pulled back slightly to look at my daughter, wiping her tear-stained cheeks with my thumbs. I asked her exactly what happened, keeping my tone gentle and steady so she would not feel like she was in trouble. Aaliyah sniffled, her small chest heaving as she caught her breath. Aunt Tasha told me she needed to look at the expensive purses in the store next door. Aaliyah whispered, her voice cracking. She said kids were not allowed in the fancy store. She told me to stand right by the big toy display and wait for her. She promised she would be right back. I waited and waited, Mommy, but she never came back. I looked out the big windows and saw her car driving away. The words hit me like physical blows. Tasha had not just been careless. She had not simply lost track of time or gotten distracted by a text message. She had intentionally instructed a 7-year-old child to wait in a massive retail warehouse while she went shopping for designer bags, and then she deliberately abandoned her there. She left my daughter to punish me, to punish Aaliyah for simply existing and receiving love. As I held my daughter, a flood of bitter memories washed over me. This was the exact same playbook Tasha had used our entire lives, and Vivian had always enabled it. When Tasha wrecked Vivian's car at 17, Vivian blamed me for not driving her. When Tasha maxed out the credit cards, Vivian drained my hard-earned college savings to pay off the debt, claiming Tasha needed to maintain a certain lifestyle to secure a wealthy husband. Vivian forced me to work 3 jobs to pay my own tuition at an out-of-state university, while Tasha was handed the world on a silver platter. Tasha was always granted endless grace for her destructive, selfish behavior. I was always the designated shock absorber, the scapegoat expected to clean up her messes and apologize for existing. They thought they could still play that game. They thought my daughter was just another prop they could push around to stroke Tasha's fragile, bottomless ego. I stood up, lifting Aaliyah into my arms. She wrapped her legs securely around my waist and buried her face in my neck. I thanked the security guard one final time and walked out of the office carrying the most precious thing in my world through the crowded store. My panic was completely gone. The frantic, terrified mother who had sped through traffic was entirely replaced by a woman who managed millions of dollars and ruthless executives for a living. We walked out the sliding red doors, and the biting November wind felt refreshing against my skin. As I reached my illegally parked car and opened the passenger door to buckle Aaliyah safely into her booster seat, my phone vibrated in the pocket of my jeans. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a text message from Tasha. The message read, "Bring a bag of ice on your way back. Connor is making cocktails." I stared at the bright screen. I read the words 3 times. My sister had abandoned my child in a public place, and her only concern was that her entitled husband needed perfectly chilled ice for his holiday drinks. A strange, eerie calm settled over me. It was not the fiery, explosive rage that leads to screaming matches and broken dishes. It was a cold, absolute, and calculated fury. The kind of fury that dismantles empires and ruins lives. I did not reply to the text. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, closed the car door, and walked around to the driver's seat. The frantic rescue mission was officially over. The war had just begun. The drive back to the house was an exercise in extreme self-restraint. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my hands ached, focusing on the sound of Aaliyah breathing softly from the back seat. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her clutching the small stuffed bear the security guard had given her, a fresh wave of adrenaline scorched through my veins. I did not speed. I did not drive erratically. I drove with the terrifying precision of a woman who had just realized she was completely surrounded by enemies. I pulled into my mother's sweeping driveway, parking my vehicle directly behind Tasha's pristine white sports car. I turned off the engine and took a slow, measured breath. I had to compartmentalize the rage. I had to be a mother first and a soldier second. I unbuckled Aaliyah and held her small hand tightly as we walked through the heavy front doors. The house smelled of roasted turkey and sweet potato pie, but the festive aroma made me sick to my stomach. I grabbed my daughter's favorite tablet from my overnight bag and handed her my noise-canceling headphones. We walked up the curved wooden staircase to the guest bedroom. I tucked her under the thick down comforter, kissed her forehead, and promised to bring her a massive plate of food later. I waited until she was completely engrossed in her game before I closed the door firmly behind me. She was safe. She was insulated. Now it was time to handle the monsters downstairs. I descended the stairs, my footsteps heavy and deliberate against the polished hardwood. The sound of clinking crystal and light, careless laughter drifted from the formal dining room. I stepped through the arched doorway and stopped. The scene before me was sickeningly domestic and entirely detached from reality. Vivian and Tasha were seated at the long mahogany dining table, completely unbothered. A lavish platter of artisanal cheeses and expensive cured meats sat between them. Tasha was holding a delicate glass of sparkling cider, laughing at something her husband Connor was shouting from the kitchen. They were eating appetizers. They were casually eating appetizers while my 7-year-old daughter had just been recovered from a security office miles away. I stepped into the warm glow of the chandelier, And the laughter died instantly. Vivian looked up, her expression shifting from holiday cheer to immediate annoyance. I walked straight up to Tasha, placing both of my hands flat on the polished wood of the table. I leaned in close enough to smell the expensive designer perfume she bathed in. "You left my child alone in a public space to go shopping," I said. My voice was incredibly low, completely devoid of the hysterical shouting they were waiting for. "I want to know exactly what was going through your mind when you started your car and drove away without her." Tasha sighed loudly, leaning back in her upholstered dining chair. She crossed her arms, defensive and entirely unapologetic. "I told you she was being difficult. She kept whining about Grandpa Elijah and how she was his favorite. I needed a minute to myself to shop in peace. She is 7 years old. She knows how to follow directions. It is not my fault she wandered off to look at toys." I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice dead flat. "You abandoned a little girl because you were jealous of the attention an 80-year-old man gave her. You used my daughter to soothe your pathetic insecurities." Before Tasha could respond, Vivian slammed her wine glass onto the table. The crystal rang out sharply, echoing through the large room. "You are always so angry and dramatic." Kendra Vivian snapped, her voice dripping with that familiar condescending disappointment. "You always escalate everything into a massive crisis. This is exactly why Tasha got the lead majorette spot in high school, and you did not. You completely lack grace. You let your temper ruin everything." The sheer audacity of her statement struck a chord that resonated through 3 decades of my life. Grace. That was Vivian's favorite weapon against me. Tasha wrecked 3 cars before her 21st birthday, and Vivian called it a necessary learning experience. When Tasha blew through her college fund partying, Vivian demanded I hand over my own hard-earned savings from my 3 part-time jobs to cover Tasha's rent. I refused and paid my own way through a state university, while Vivian secretly took out a personal loan to keep Tasha in her luxury sorority house. Tasha was allowed to be reckless, careless, and destructive. I was required to be flawless, invisible, and entirely self-sufficient. If I showed 1 ounce of the frustration I rightfully felt, I was immediately labeled the angry, difficult black sheep of the family who lacked grace. I stood up straight, looking down at my mother. "Your idea of grace is just a convenient cover for zero accountability," I said, staring directly into Vivian's eyes. "You taught her that she can do whatever she wants and someone else will always pay the price. But you made a massive miscalculation today. You messed with my child. You do not get to gaslight me into accepting child abandonment as a quirky personality trait." Vivian scoffed, waving the manicured hand dismissively in my direction. "You are projecting your own insecurities because you are a single mother. You harbor all this resentment because you have to work for a living while Tasha is beautifully provided for. Do not bring your corporate boardroom aggression into my dining room on Thanksgiving." Tasha made a tiny mistake. "Aaliyah is perfectly fine. Get over it." A tiny mistake. She categorized leaving a first grader to fend for herself in a commercial retail zone as a tiny mistake. I looked at Tasha. She was actively smirking, feeding off our mother's protection like a parasite. She knew she was untouchable in this house. She had spent her entire life shielded by Vivian's fierce, relentless favoritism. Tasha picked up a piece of expensive cheese, popped it into her mouth, and brushed her hands together as if wiping away the entire conversation. "Look, I am not doing this with you today, Kendra," Tasha said, examining her freshly painted nails. "I am not going to let your miserable energy ruin my holiday. I have much bigger things to focus on right now." She leaned forward, a greedy, triumphant gleam lighting up her eyes. She clearly wanted to change the subject to her favorite topic, which was herself. "In case you forgot, Monday is the big day. Grandpa Elijah is officially releasing my $500,000 trust distribution. Connor and I are booking a first-class luxury trip to Dubai to celebrate. So you can stay here and be miserable about a harmless little shopping trip while I plan my dessert excursions." She took another sip of her drink, looking at me with pure, unadulterated arrogance. I stared back at her, the fury in my chest crystallizing into absolute zero. $500,000. I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the heavy air of the dining room. Tasha smiled proudly, popping another olive into her mouth as if we were discussing the weather. She swiped her thumb across her smartphone screen, pulling up a picture of a massive suite overlooking the ocean. "We are flying Emirates first class," Tasha bragged, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Connor insists we need the private suite on the plane. You know how his back gets on commercial flights? And Grandpa Elijah's trust distribution is going to cover all of it. A $500,000 wire transfer hits my checking account first thing Monday morning. I have already scheduled a personal shopper at the Dubai Mall." Vivian sighed happily, leaning her chin on her hand. "You deserve it, sweetheart. You have had such a stressful year with the house renovations. A luxury vacation is exactly what you need to recharge." I looked at my mother and felt a wave of absolute disgust. She was praising the woman who had just abandoned her grandchild in a retail store, commending her for surviving the grueling hardship of picking out marble countertops. "You think she deserves $500,000 of Grandpa's money?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You think she deserves a luxury vacation after using my 7-year-old daughter as a pawn to make herself feel superior?" Vivian slammed her hand on the mahogany table, making the silverware rattle. "Do not ruin this, Kendra. Grandpa Elijah established those trusts for a reason. Tasha is his granddaughter and she is entitled to her share. It is not her fault you are so bitter about money." Bitter. I took a step forward, closing the distance between me and the table. "I am not bitter about money, Vivian. I am perfectly fine making my own. What I am disgusted by is the delusion in this room. You talk about Tasha being entitled to wealth, as if she has ever worked a single day in her life to earn it. She does not know how to build wealth. She only knows how to steal it." Tasha slammed her phone face down on the table, her smug smile finally slipping. "Excuse me, I have never stolen anything in my life." "Do you really want to play this game right now?" I asked, tilting my head. "Because my memory is flawless. Let us talk about my college fund. Let us talk about the $40,000 I saved from working 3 jobs in high school." The room temperature seemed to drop. Vivian looked away, suddenly very interested in the arrangement of the charcuterie board. Tasha crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "I worked the early shift at the diner." I continued, my voice ringing clear and steady in the silent room. "I tutored underclassmen in advanced calculus until 9 o'clock at night. I saved every single dollar to pay my tuition because Vivian told me there was absolutely no money left for my education." "And what happened to that money, Tasha? What happened the summer before my freshman year?" Tasha rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated groan. "Are we seriously bringing up ancient history? That was over a decade ago, Kendra. Let it go." "I will never let it go," I shot back. "You stole my debit card and accessed my accounts. You drained $40,000 in less than 3 months. And what did you buy? You did not buy books. You did not pay for classes. You bought a designer wardrobe to rush a top-tier sorority. You blew my entire future on luxury handbags and weekend trips to Miami." Vivian stood up, her silk blouse shimmering in the chandelier light. "That is enough, Kendra. We dealt with that situation years ago. Tasha made a youthful mistake, and she needed those connections." I stared at my mother, the sheer absurdity of her defense echoing in my ears. "She committed felony wire fraud, Vivian. And when I went to the police, you threatened to kick me out of the house and cut me off from the entire family if I pressed charges. You told me Tasha needed that specific lifestyle to attract a wealthy husband. You sacrificed my college education so your favorite daughter could play dress-up and trap a man." I pointed a finger directly at Tasha, who was now glaring at me from across the table. "I had to take out massive student loans. I had to work night shifts in the campus library while trying to pass my finance exams. I built my career from the absolute bottom while you partied on my dime." Tasha let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. She picked up her wineglass, swirling the golden liquid with a look of utter boredom. "And look how well it worked out for you. You are a successful vice president now. The struggle clearly built your character. You should be thanking me for giving you that relentless work ethic." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, looking me up and down with genuine pity. "You are holding on to all this rage over $40,000 from a decade ago. It is honestly pathetic, Kendra. You are standing here hyperventilating over ancient history, while I am literally days away from becoming $500,000 richer. The past does not matter because Monday morning I get exactly what is coming to me. Tasha smiled a wide, glittering smile of absolute certainty. Grandpa Elijah is going to sign that distribution paper, and there is absolutely nothing your angry, jealous heart can do to stop it. I win, Kendra. I always win. I stood completely still. The rage that had been burning a hole in my chest suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a pristine, crystal-clear sense of purpose. I looked at Tasha sitting there in her designer clothes, banking her entire future on a fantasy. I looked at Vivian standing proudly beside her, defending the indefensible. They had no idea. They were so wrapped up in their own arrogance and their lifelong habit of stepping on my neck that they were completely blind to the reality of the situation. They thought they still held all the power. They thought Grandpa Elijah was just an old man with a checkbook who would blindly fund their toxic lifestyle forever. A slow, genuine smirk spread across my face. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a trap. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth was going to be loud enough. You think Grandpa Elijah's money is going to fund your desert excursions? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously soft whisper. You think that $500,000 wire transfer is just waiting for you on Monday morning? Tasha frowned, her eyes narrowing at my sudden change in demeanor. Yes. The trust matures on my 32nd birthday. That is the rule. The bank automatically prepares the transfer. I let out a soft, dry laugh, shaking my head slowly. You are so incredibly confident, Tasha. It is almost impressive. But you are missing one massive, crucial detail. Vivian stepped forward, her protective instincts flaring up as she sensed the sudden shift in my energy. What are you talking about, Kendra? Stop speaking in riddles. I locked eyes with my mother, relishing the absolute power of the moment. You do not even know what happened to his accounts yesterday. The smug confidence completely vanished from Tasha's face, replaced by a sudden sharp flash of uncertainty. Vivian froze, her hand hovering above her wineglass. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence as the reality of my words hung in the air. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence as the reality of my words hung in the air. The only sound left in the sprawling dining room was the quiet hum of the central heating unit and the faint clinking of ice from the kitchen. I watched the arrogant smirk completely slide off Tasha's face, replaced by a sudden sharp flash of uncertainty. Her perfectly manicured fingers twitched against the edge of the mahogany table. Vivian froze like a statue, her wineglass suspended halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and her golden child. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. The frantic mother who had torn through holiday traffic was gone, replaced by the ruthless vice president of wealth management, who dismantled hostile takeovers before breakfast. I casually reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim chandelier light. I unlocked the device, tapping the screen with a slow, deliberate rhythm that I knew would drive them absolutely insane. What exactly are you talking about, Kendra? Vivian demanded, her voice losing its previous authoritative edge. It was higher now, tighter. She set her crystal glass down so hard the stem nearly snapped. Stop speaking in riddles right now. Elijah established those trust parameters 20 years ago. They are ironclad. Are they? I asked, my eyes fixed on my phone screen. I swiped through my secure email inbox, finding the exact encrypted document I had received 24 hours ago. You see, Vivian, ironclad is a very funny word. People who do not understand money love to use it. They think throwing funds into a trust account means the money sits in a magical vault, waiting for a spoiled brat to turn 32. But you both seem to have forgotten what I do for a living. Tasha scoffed loudly, but the sound was hollow and weak. You are bluffing, she said, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. The bank mailed me the maturity distribution notice 30 days ago. It is on official letterhead. The funds release automatically on Monday. You have absolutely no power over Grandpa Elijah's money. I slowly looked up from my screen, meeting my sister's panicked gaze. I never said I had power over his money, Tasha, but I do manage his primary investment portfolios. And more importantly, I am the only person in this family he actually trusts to give him sound financial advice. Do you honestly think a man who built a multi-million-dollar construction empire from scratch just hands over $500,000 without a final review? The color rapidly drained from Tasha's cheeks. Her heavy contour and blush suddenly looked like paint smeared over chalk. She glanced at our mother silently, begging Vivian to fix the situation, to wave a magic wand and make the bad news go away. But Vivian was staring at me, her jaw clenched so tightly, a vein throbbed in her neck. "You did not answer my question," Vivian said, her voice dropping into a dangerous warning register. "What happened to his accounts yesterday, Kendra?" I took a slow step forward, pressing my hands flat against the table. I leaned in, making sure they heard every single syllable. Yesterday afternoon, Grandpa Elijah called my office. He wanted to discuss the liquidity of the accounts assigned to Tasha's distribution. He wanted to make sure everything was properly aligned for Monday, but we ended up having a very long, very eye-opening conversation about responsibility. We talked about entitlement, and we specifically talked about how wealth can utterly destroy a person who has never had to work a single day in her life. "You poisoned him against me!" Tasha shrieked, uncrossing her arms and slamming her hands on the table. "You jealous, bitter witch. You went behind my back and fed him a bunch of lies because you cannot stand the fact that I get to live a life you will never have." "I did not feed him lies," I corrected sharply. "I fed him the exact credit card statements you tried to hide from Connor. I showed him the $60,000 in consumer debt you managed to rack up in the last 8 months alone. I showed him the line of credit you secretly opened using Vivian's home address." Vivian's head snapped toward Tasha so fast I thought her neck might break. "You did what Vivian hissed." Tasha shrank back into her chair, stammering, "It was just a temporary bridge loan, Mom. The kitchen remodel went over budget. I was going to pay it all completely off on Monday, the second the trust cleared. And that right there is exactly why you are never getting that money," I said. I tapped the screen of my phone one final time and slid it across the smooth wooden table right into the center of the charcuterie board. "Look at the screen, Tasha. Read the document." Tasha leaned forward, her eyes scanning the brightly lit screen. Vivian leaned in right beside her. I watched their eyes dart back and forth, reading the legal jargon, the official bank letterhead, and the digital signature at the absolute bottom of the page. It was a formal restructuring order. "No," Tasha gasped, all the air rushing out of her lungs. "No, he cannot do this. This is illegal." "It is completely legal," I stated smoothly. "As the primary benefactor and living grantor, Grandpa Elijah has the absolute right to restructure the distribution terms if he deems the beneficiary financially unfit. He signed the paperwork yesterday at 4 in the afternoon. The funds are no longer scheduled for a lump sum release. Instead, your precious $500,000 has been locked into a highly restrictive annuity." Tasha looked like she was going to be sick. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "What does that mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I smiled, showing all of my teeth. "It means you do not get $500,000 on Monday. It means you get a heavily taxed allowance of exactly $2,000 a month for the next 20 years. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot cash it out early. And you certainly cannot use it to buy a first-class ticket to Dubai." "You did this," Vivian yelled, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You orchestrated this entire thing just to humiliate your sister." "I did not orchestrate her staggering financial incompetence," I fired back. "I just brought it to the attention of the man whose money she was planning to burn." "You thought you could treat me like dirt. You thought you could leave my 7-year-old daughter abandoned in a massive store as some kind of sick, twisted punishment. You thought there would be absolutely no consequences because there are never any consequences for the golden child." Tasha buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, piercing sob. "My trip," she wailed. "Everything is booked. The deposits are non-refundable. Connor is going to absolutely kill me." Speaking of Connor, I said casually, taking my phone back from the table. I wonder how he is going to react when he finds out his luxury vacation is officially canceled and his wife has $60,000 of hidden debt. Before Tasha could even lift her head to beg me to keep my mouth shut, the heavy wooden swinging door from the kitchen suddenly pushed open. The hinges squeaked loudly, breaking the heavy tension in the dining room. Connor strolled into the room looking completely relaxed and entirely oblivious to the catastrophic emotional explosion that had just occurred. He was wearing a crisp, tailored button-down shirt, his sleeves casually rolled up to his forearms. In his right hand, he held a gleaming silver cocktail shaker, shaking it with a rhythmic metallic clatter. "Can you guys keep it down out here?" Connor complained, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. I am trying to measure the simple syrup for these martinis, and all I hear is yelling. Why is everyone so tense? It is Thanksgiving. We are going to Dubai in 4 days. We should be celebrating. He stopped at the edge of the table, a confused smile frozen on his face as he finally noticed Tasha sobbing uncontrollably into her hands and Vivian looking like she had just seen a ghost. He slowly lowered the cocktail shaker. "What exactly is going on here?" Connor asked, his eyes darting toward me. I crossed my arms, turning to face my brother-in-law with a perfectly calm expression. "Oh, nothing much, Connor," I replied, my voice light and conversational. "Tasha was just getting ready to tell you about a slight change of plans regarding your upcoming vacation." I stepped back, giving Tasha the floor, watching her entire world burn to the ground. Connor stopped shaking his cocktail. He set the frosted silver tumbler down on the granite coaster next to the charcuterie board, the ice inside settling with a soft clink. He looked from his sobbing wife, who had buried her face so deeply into her hands that her perfectly blown-out hair cascaded into the expensive cheese, to my mother, who stood frozen with her jaw tight, and finally his gaze landed on me. He let out a long, exhausted breath, running a hand through his perfectly styled, expensive haircut. He wore the expression of a man who was deeply inconvenienced by the emotional labor of the women around him. He had absolutely no idea about the trust fund. He had no idea his wife had just incinerated his $500,000 fantasy, or that she was hiding a mountain of secret credit card debt. In his mind, there was only one logical explanation for the tension in the room. I was overreacting again. "Kendra, really?" Connor asked, his tone dripping with a practiced corporate condescension. He reached over and placed a heavy, comforting hand on Tasha's shaking shoulder. "Are we actually still talking about the Target thing? I thought you went to pick her up." "She is fine, right? You found her. End of story." I did not blink. "She is 7 years old, Connor. Your wife deliberately abandoned her in a commercial warehouse on the busiest shopping week of the year." Connor let out a sharp, dismissive chuckle, shaking his head, as if I had just told a wildly inappropriate joke. He leaned his hip against the edge of the mahogany table, crossing his ankles in his expensive Italian loafers. He looked at me with the exact same patronizing expression he probably used on his junior sales reps when they missed a quarterly quota. "Look, Kendra, let us not play the angry black woman stereotype tonight," Connor said, his voice lowering into a smooth, placating rhythm that made my skin crawl. "Tasha made a tiny mistake. It happens. Kids wander off. It is a big store with a lot of distractions. You cannot expect her to keep eyes on a hyperactive kid every single second when she has important things to take care of." The sheer audacity of the racial microaggression hung in the air, toxic and heavy. He threw out the stereotypes so casually, weaponizing my race and my completely justified maternal rage to paint me as the irrational aggressor. Vivian did not flinch. She did not correct him. My mother simply stood there and allowed this privileged, arrogant man to disrespect her eldest daughter in her own home. Connor took my silence as an invitation to keep lecturing. He unrolled his sleeves slightly, exposing his heavy platinum watch. "You need to gain a little perspective here," he continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Tasha has been under an immense amount of pressure lately. Managing the contractors for the kitchen remodel is a full-time job in itself, not to mention organizing our travel itinerary for Dubai. The logistics are incredibly stressful." She just needed a minute to breathe and look at some bags. Do not let your stress as a single mom ruin the holiday for the rest of us. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. The casual cruelty of his words was staggering. He was actually standing in my mother's dining room, attempting to gaslight me into believing that my daughter's abandonment was completely justified because his wife was stressed about picking out marble countertops and booking desert safaris. He used my status as a single mother as a weapon, implying that because I did not have a husband to financially carry me, my life was inherently chaotic and bitter. My stress as a single mother, I repeated, my voice dangerously even. Exactly, Connor said, nodding, as if I had finally grasped a complex mathematical equation. He picked up his cocktail shaker again, pouring the perfectly chilled liquid into a martini glass. We all know you work hard. You have your little corporate job and you hustle to provide for Aaliyah. That is commendable. Really it is. But you bring that aggressive, relentless energy into this house, and it is exhausting for everyone. Tasha is delicate. She is used to a certain standard of living, a certain level of peace. I work very hard to provide a life where my wife does not have to worry about the kind of daily struggles you deal with. He took a sip of his drink, savoring the taste, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was practically hyperventilating beside him. Tasha was shaking so violently, her chair vibrated against the hardwood floor. She was terrified. She knew what I knew, and she knew her husband was currently digging a grave so deep, neither of them would ever climb out of it. You should take a page out of her book, Connor added, offering me a condescending smile. Learn to relax. Learn to let things go. If you were a little softer, a little more forgiving, maybe you would not have to carry the entire world on your shoulders. You could actually enjoy Thanksgiving instead of turning a simple miscommunication at a retail store into a federal case. He reached out to pat Tasha's back again. Right, babe. We are not going to let this ruin our vibe. We have a $500,000 celebration to get ready for. Tasha let out a choked, muffled gasp, refusing to lift her face from her hands. I stood absolutely still, letting his words wash over me. I analyzed the man standing before me. Connor was born on third base and genuinely believed he had hit a triple. He walked through life with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence, completely insulated by his race, his gender, and the illusion of his wealth. He thought he was the ultimate provider, the king of his suburban castle, protecting his fragile wife from her aggressive, bitter sister. He had no idea that his castle was built on a foundation of maxed-out credit cards and secret loans. He had no idea that his delicate wife was a financial parasite who had just lost their only lifeline. I slowly turned my body away from my sobbing sister and my pale, silent mother. I shifted my weight, bringing my lethal focus entirely and exclusively onto Connor. He noticed the shift in my posture. His arrogant smile faltered just a fraction of an inch, his eyes darting to my face as he registered the absolute freezing calm radiating from my expression. I reached over my shoulder and pulled the strap of my heavy leather purse down my arm. I gripped the handles with both hands. I did not break eye contact with him for a single millisecond. I lifted the bag and set it down dead center on the polished mahogany dining table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud that echoed through the silent room like a gavel striking a sound block. The heavy brass zipper of my leather tote bag echoed through the completely silent dining room. I did not rush. I moved with the slow, deliberate precision of a surgeon preparing to make the first vital incision. Tasha was still weeping into her hands, but her sobs had quieted into terrified, shallow gasps. She was watching me through her fingers, knowing exactly what was inside that bag. Vivian stood frozen, her posture rigid, her eyes darting frantically between me and her perfectly manicured son-in-law. Connor, however, simply let out an exasperated sigh. He took a slow, arrogant sip from his martini glass, looking at me as if I were a slightly annoying pest buzzing around his expensive holiday dinner. "Are you pulling out a tissue to dry your tears?" Kendra Connor asked, a smug, patronizing smile playing on his lips. "I told you we are not doing the dramatic, angry black woman routine tonight. Put the bag away and go check on your kid. We have adult things to discuss." I did not blink. I reached into the deep pocket of the tote and pulled out a thick, perfectly bound manila folder. I set it down flat on the mahogany table, right next to the lavish charcuterie board. I rested my hand on top of the smooth paper-locking eyes, with the man who genuinely believed his privilege made him bulletproof. "You talk a lot about providing, Connor," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "You talk about protecting your delicate wife from the struggles of the real world. You stand in my mother's house drinking her expensive liquor lecturing me about grace and stress. But providing implies you actually have something to offer. Providing implies you are not completely financially destitute." Connor's patronizing smile immediately vanished. The crystal martini glass in his hand tilted slightly, sloshing the clear liquid dangerously close to the rim. He shot a confused, panicked look at Tasha, but she squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to look at him. Vivian took a sharp breath, stepping closer to the table. "What is she talking about, Connor?" Vivian demanded, her voice cracking with sudden anxiety. I did not give him the chance to spin another lie. I opened the manila folder and slid the first thick stack of stapled documents straight across the polished wood. The papers stopped right in front of his expensive Italian loafers. "Let us talk about your highly successful tech startup," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Elevate Data Solutions. That was the name of the company, right? The one you spent 3 years bragging about at every single Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter dinner. The one that was going to disrupt the entire cloud computing industry and make you a billionaire before you turned 35. Connor stared down at the documents. All the color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashy gray. His jaw slackened, and the cocktail shaker he had been holding in his left hand slipped from his grip, landing on the dining table with a loud, metallic crash. Ice spilled across the wood, melting into the expensive linen runner. He did not even flinch. "You see, Vivian," I said, never taking my eyes off Connor. "Elevate Data Solutions does not exist anymore. It has not existed for exactly 6 months. They burned through their Series A funding, failed to secure a second round of venture capital, and completely defaulted on their commercial lease. They were evicted from their downtown office space in May." "That is a lie," Vivian gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Connor just closed a massive deal last month. He told us all about it at brunch. They are expanding to the West Coast." "He did not close a deal, Vivian," I corrected sharply. "He closed the doors. The documents sitting right in front of him are the official Chapter 7 bankruptcy filings. He liquidated the entire company. He wiped out his investors. He currently has 0 income, 0 assets, and 0 prospects. Your son-in-law has been completely unemployed for half a year." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound in the room was the heavy, ragged breathing coming from Tasha's side of the table. Connor stood frozen, his eyes glued to the bankruptcy filing. The flawless, arrogant provider facade he had maintained for years was currently shattering into a million irreparable pieces on my mother's dining room floor. "But the bankruptcy is not even the most pathetic part of the story," I continued, my voice slicing through the tension like a razor. "The most pathetic part is the desperate, humiliating lengths you two went to in order to keep up appearances." I pulled a second stack of papers from the folder and tossed them onto the table. "You could not bear the thought of the other couples at the Oakwood Country Club finding out you were broke," I said, shaking my head in disgust. "You could not stomach the idea of losing your social status. So instead of downsizing, instead of selling the cars, or God forbid getting a regular job, you started living entirely on credit. You paid your $15,000 country club membership renewal on a high-interest credit card last month just so you could keep playing golf on Tuesdays. Both of your luxury SUV leases are exactly 90 days past due. You are one missed phone call away from having your vehicles repossessed right out of Vivian's driveway." Vivian stumbled backward, grabbing the back of a dining chair to steady herself. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at Tasha, who was now actively weeping, and then at Connor, who was staring at me with a look of pure, venomous hatred. Tasha knew everything I stated, gesturing toward my sobbing sister. She watched the bank accounts hit 0. She watched the collection notices pile up in the mail. And instead of acting like a responsible adult, she conspired with you to hide it from the family. They were banking their entire survival on Grandpa Elijah's trust distribution. That $500,000 was supposed to be their magical bailout. They were going to use it to pay off the secret debt, save the cars, and book a flashy vacation to Dubai just to prove to their country club friends that they were still wealthy. I closed the empty folder and crossed my arms. But as I mentioned earlier, Grandpa Elijah moved that money into a highly restricted annuity yesterday afternoon, so the bailout is officially dead. The money is gone. The facade is over. Connor slowly lifted his head. The sickly gray color of his skin was rapidly replaced by a violent mottled red. The veins in his forehead bulged, and his hands balled into tight, shaking fists at his sides. His entire body vibrated with a humiliated, furious energy. The condescending tech bro was completely gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate fraud. He took a step towards me, his chest heaving, his eyes completely wild. He looked at the highly classified, encrypted financial documents scattered across the table, and then glared directly into my eyes. "How did you get these?" Connor demanded, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. "How the hell does a low-level bank teller have access to my private corporate filings?" "A low-level bank teller," I repeated, letting out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. The sound cut through the heavy tension in the dining room like a blade. "You really have absolutely no idea who I am or what I do for a living, do you, Connor? You are so blinded by your own inflated sense of superiority that you never bothered to actually listen when I talked about my career. I am the Vice President of Wealth Management at Sterling & Sterling. My firm literally underwrote the massive commercial loan you defaulted on 3 months ago. You were flagged as a toxic asset in a routine quarterly risk assessment portfolio. I did not even have to look for your pathetic corporate filings. Your complete financial ruin crossed my mahogany desk in a standard manila folder before 9 in the morning." Connor's jaw flexed visibly, the muscles popping under his skin. He opened his mouth to formulate a rebuttal, to throw out another patronizing tech buzzword or corporate insult. But his brain simply could not process the fact that the woman he had just mocked was sitting at the absolute top of the financial food chain that had just devoured his company. He looked down at the bankruptcy papers and then back up at me, his chest heaving with trapped, aggressive breath. "But your spectacular business failure is not even the most interesting thing I found in those audits." I continued, my voice dropping into a smooth, dangerous cadence. I slowly turned my gaze away from Connor and locked my eyes directly onto my mother. The most interesting detail was tracing the massive, highly irregular cash injection that mysteriously appeared in Elevate Data Solutions' operating account right before the final collapse. Vivian's face lost whatever color it had left. Her perfectly styled posture crumbled, and she took a sudden, panicked step backward, bumping into the edge of the antique china cabinet. She grabbed the edge of the polished wood, her knuckles instantly turning white. "Do not say another word, Kendra," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling with raw, undisguised panic. "I am warning you right now. Do not do this." "You love to talk about grace, Vivian," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "You love to lecture me about how my stress ruins the holidays. You sit on your high horse and judge me for working for a living while praising Tasha for securing a wealthy provider. But we both know the truth, do we not? We both know exactly who the actual provider in this room is." Tasha lifted her tear-streaked face, looking frantically between me and our mother. "Mom, what is she talking about? What cash injection? Tell her, Vivian," I demanded, keeping my voice razor-sharp. "Tell your precious golden child how you have been secretly keeping her fragile illusion of wealth alive. Tell her what you did when Connor came crying to you 6 months ago, begging for a bailout, because his investors had finally figured out he was a complete fraud." Vivian shook her head violently, refusing to speak, her eyes darting toward the floor. "Fine, I will tell her," I said, turning my attention back to my sister. Vivian could not stand the thought of her country club friends finding out her golden son-in-law was totally bankrupt. She could not stomach the inevitable gossip. She could not bear the reality of you moving back into your childhood bedroom with your tail between your legs. So she quietly went to her private banker. She signed away the equity on this pristine, sprawling suburban fantasy. She took out a massive second mortgage on this exact house, pulling $300,000 straight out of the bricks and mortar just to wire it into a dummy limited liability company to cover Connor's massive corporate debts. Tasha gasped, her hands flying to cover her mouth. She looked at Vivian, her eyes wide with total shock. "Mom, you took out a loan on the house, you remortgaged the house for Connor." I watched the absolute devastation wash over Tasha, but I did not feel a single ounce of pity. She had happily abandoned my 7-year-old daughter in a warehouse to go shopping for luxury handbags. She deserved every single second of this horrific reality check. But the most spectacular reaction did not come from Tasha. It came from the man who had just benefited from a $300,000 secret bailout. Connor did not look relieved. He did not rush to comfort his mother-in-law or thank her for risking her entire financial future to save him from prison. Instead, he exploded with a dark, violent rage. "You used a recorded equity line," Connor screamed, stepping aggressively toward Vivian. The sudden volume of his voice made the crystal glasses rattle on the dining table. "You explicitly told me the money was coming from an untraceable offshore family trust. You put my corporate tax ID next to a traceable domestic loan. Are you completely incompetent?" Vivian flinched, shrinking away from the man she had spent years praising. "Connor, I had to act fast," Vivian stammered, holding her hands up defensively. "The bank was threatening to seize your assets within 48 hours. Elijah controls all the offshore trusts. I could not ask him for the money without explaining your bankruptcy. I had to use the house. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to save Tasha's marriage." "Protect me!" Connor snarled, taking another heavy step toward her, his face twisted in utter disgust. "You left a massive paper trail leading directly to a bankrupt entity. You tied my failing company to your personal real estate. Do you have any idea what the IRS is going to do when they audit those accounts? You stupid, arrogant woman, you just handed them a roadmap to pierce the corporate veil. You ruined me." Tasha let out a sharp, terrified cry, shrinking into her chair as she witnessed the monstrous, abusive side of her husband finally bleeding out into the open. The polished, wealthy tech bro was gone. He was screaming at her mother, degrading the woman who had literally put her home on the line to save his pathetic ego. Vivian stood pinned against the china cabinet, her eyes wide with shock as the man she had idolized verbally destroyed her. The illusion she had sacrificed my college fund for the illusion she had spent decades protecting at my expense was completely burning down right in front of her face. But Vivian was incapable of accepting defeat. She was entirely incapable of admitting she had backed the wrong horse. Instead of turning her anger toward the man currently screaming at her, she deflected. She projected all of her massive, overwhelming humiliation directly onto the family scapegoat. Vivian snapped. Her hands stopped shaking, and her expression hardened into a mask of pure, desperate venom. She reached into the pocket of her emerald silk blouse and pulled out her smartphone. She gripped it so tightly her fingers trembled. "This is your fault!" Vivian screamed, pointing her phone like a loaded weapon directly at my chest. "You brought this filth into my house, Kendra. You dragged these documents in here just to destroy your sister. You could not stand seeing her happy. You could not stand that she was getting the life you wanted. You are tearing this family apart just like you always do." She aggressively jabbed her thumb against the screen, unlocking the device. "I am ending this right now," Vivian threatened, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I am calling Grandpa Elijah. I am telling him exactly what you have done tonight. I am going to make sure he writes you and your brat completely out of his will forever. You will never see a single dime of the family money, Kendra. I will make sure you are left with absolutely nothing." Vivian tapped the screen of her phone with such brutal force I thought the glass might shatter under her thumb. Her emerald silk blouse heaved with her ragged, frantic breathing. She was backed into a corner, and like any cornered predator, she was lashing out with the only weapon she thought she had left. "You have crossed a line that you can never uncross." "Kendra," Vivian hissed. Her eyes were wide and manic, stripped of all the refined country club elegance she usually projected. "I am calling your grandfather right now. I am telling him that you are having a complete mental breakdown. I will tell him you hacked into confidential banking servers and fabricated documents just to terrorize your sister on Thanksgiving." Tasha, who had been practically hyperventilating in her chair just seconds ago, suddenly stopped crying. The moment she realized our mother was stepping up to act as her human shield, the tears magically vanished. She reached up and wiped the smeared mascara from under her eyes, letting out a wet, jagged laugh. "You are so stupid, Kendra." Tasha mocked, her voice dripping with renewed arrogance. She adjusted her posture, sitting up straight and crossing her arms over her chest. "You really thought you could just waltz in here and ruin my life? You thought Grandpa Elijah would actually take your side over Mom? Mom has power of attorney over half his estate properties. He listens to everything she says." I did not say a word. I simply stood there with my arms crossed, watching the sheer delusion radiate from the two of them. It was a fascinating psychological study. They were literally standing in the ashes of their financial ruin, and yet they were still trying to arrange the furniture. Connor remained completely silent. He had retreated to the far side of the dining room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest. His face was still flushed, a violent, angry red from his earlier explosion, but he was watching Vivian with a desperate, calculating intensity. He was a parasite, hoping his host could pull off one last miracle. If Vivian could somehow get Grandpa Elijah on the phone, if she could somehow manipulate the old man into reversing the trust restructuring, Connor might actually survive the week without facing federal bankruptcy fraud. "He is going to cut you off entirely," Vivian continued, her thumb scrolling aggressively through her digital contact list. "I am going to make sure he revokes your access to the family investment accounts. I will have you removed from the Sterling and Sterling management team. You want to play dirty? I will destroy your entire career before the banks open on Monday." "Go ahead, Vivian," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and devoid of any emotion. "Call him. Call the man whose wealth you just used as collateral for a fraudulent tech company. I am sure he will be absolutely thrilled to hear from you." Vivian glared at me, her eyes practically vibrating with hatred. She found the contact and pressed the green call button, pressing the phone tightly to her ear. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint rhythmic ringing echoing from the earpiece. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. "Pick up, pick up, pick up," Vivian muttered under her breath, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously against the mahogany table. 4 rings, 5 rings. Then the automated voice of a corporate answering service filled the silent dining room. "You have reached the executive office of Elijah Vance. Mr. Vance is currently unavailable. If this is a personal matter, please contact the primary estate manager. If this is a business inquiry, please leave a detailed message and a member of our acquisitions team will return your call during normal business hours." Vivian let out a sharp, frustrated growl and yanked the phone away from her ear. She aggressively jabbed the red end call button. "His executive team has the holiday weekend forwarding turned on," Vivian snapped, glaring at me as if the automated message was my personal fault. "They always screen his calls when he is at the Aspen property." "It does not matter. I will call Marcus. Marcus manages the estate staff. I will have him walk a private phone directly to Elijah's study." Tasha nodded vigorously, completely buying into the fantasy. "Do it, Mom. Call Marcus. Tell him it is an absolute emergency. Tell him Kendra is having a psychotic break and trying to steal my trust fund." I let out a slow, deep breath. The sheer monumental ignorance in the room was almost suffocating. They actually believed they were the main characters in a story they had zero control over. They thought they held the reins because they possessed a few generic contact numbers for the estate staff. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational and light. Vivian paused, her thumb hovering over the screen of her phone. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I am just getting started, Kendra. You are done. You are dialing a public receptionist, Vivian," I stated calmly. "You are calling an executive switchboard that filters out thousands of calls a day from people who think they are important enough to speak to a billionaire. You think you hold the ultimate trump card because you are his daughter-in-law, but you do not even possess his actual phone number." Vivian's jaw tightened. "I have the number to his private study." "You have the number to the landline on his secretary's desk," I corrected, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the dining table. "You have the number he gives to relatives he wants to keep at a polite, manageable distance." A man like Elijah Vance does not give his direct unmonitored access line to people who view him as a personal ATM. I reached out and picked up my own smartphone from the table. The screen illuminated instantly, recognizing my face. "What are you doing?" Connor demanded, his voice rough and laced with sudden panic. He pushed himself off the wall, taking a step toward the center of the room. He could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The predator in him recognized that I was not bluffing. "I am doing exactly what Vivian has been threatening to do for the last 5 minutes," I replied without looking at him. I opened my contact list. I did not search for an estate manager. I did not search for an executive assistant. I tapped a single contact name saved simply as Elijah Direct. I hit the dial button. Then I did exactly what I had wanted to do since I walked into this house. I pressed the speakerphone icon and slammed the heavy metallic edge of my smartphone directly onto the center of the polished mahogany table. The impact created a sharp echoing crack that made Tasha flinch in her chair. The dial tone blared through the high-definition speakers. It was not the standard digital ring of a corporate switchboard. It was the distinct heavy trill of a private encrypted satellite line. "Ring." Vivian froze. Her eyes dropped to the phone sitting on the table. The color drained from her face as she recognized the specific tone. It was a sound she had only heard a handful of times in her entire life. It was the sound of the red line, the number reserved strictly for high-level acquisitions, legal emergencies, and the absolute inner circle of his financial empire. "Ring." Tasha looked from the phone to her mother, her smug expression rapidly dissolving back into raw terror. "Mom," Tasha whispered, her voice shaking. "Mom, whose number is that?" Vivian could not answer. Her vocal cords seemed entirely paralyzed. She stared at the glowing screen of my phone, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with the sudden horrifying realization that she was completely outmatched. She had spent decades parading around the country club, leveraging the family name, demanding respect from everyone she encountered. She had treated me like a second-class citizen in my own family because I chose to work for my wealth instead of marrying into it. She had no idea that while she was busy bragging about her connections, I was busy becoming the connection. The phone did not ring a third time. There was a sharp click, followed by the crisp, unmistakable sound of ice clinking against heavy crystal. Then a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the dining room, a voice that commanded absolute terrifying authority. "Kendra," my grandfather said, his voice a rich, textured baritone that instantly dominated the entire room. "I thought I explicitly ordered you to shut down your laptop and actually enjoy your holiday weekend." Tasha let out a strangled, whimpering gasp. She shrank back into her chair, pressing her hands over her mouth. Vivian stared at the glowing phone screen with wide, unblinking eyes, as if a venomous snake had just slithered onto her dining table. "I tried, Grandpa," I replied, my voice completely steady, "but we have a rather urgent situation here at Vivian's house." There was a brief pause on the line. The faint sound of ice clinking against glass stopped. "What kind of situation?" Elijah asked, his tone immediately shifting from familial warmth to sharp, calculated focus. "Are you all right? Is Aaliyah safe?" "Aaliyah is safe now," I answered, keeping my eyes locked on Vivian. "But she was not safe 2 hours ago. Tasha took her out to run errands this morning. Apparently looking at luxury handbags she cannot afford became too stressful. So Tasha walked out of the store, got into her car, and drove home. She abandoned your 7-year-old great-granddaughter completely alone in the middle of a massive retail warehouse on the busiest shopping weekend of the year." A heavy, suffocating silence radiated from the speakerphone. I could practically feel the temperature in the room plummet. She did what Elijah asked. His voice did not rise. It dropped an octave, becoming a low, dangerous rumble that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Grandpa, it was a total misunderstanding," Tasha blurted out, leaning toward the phone, her voice shrill and panicked. "I thought she was right behind me. Kendra is twisting the narrative to make me look bad." "Shut your mouth, Tasha!" Elijah snapped the command, cracking like a whip. "Do not speak until I address you directly. Kendra, finish your report." I did not break eye contact with my mother, and when I confronted them about it, Vivian told me I was overreacting. She told me I was ruining the holiday vibe by being upset. She praised Tasha for her resilience in picking out countertops. Then Connor stepped in to politely inform me that I was acting like an angry black woman stereotype, and that my stress as a single mother was a burden to the family. Connor physically flinched, backing away from the table until his shoulders hit the wall. He looked like he wanted the floorboards to open up and swallow him whole. "I see," Elijah said softly. The quietness of his voice was terrifying. "I am calling you on the direct line for 2 reasons." "Grandpa?" I continued, leaning forward slightly, resting my hands on the edge of the table. "First, I needed you to know exactly who these people are when they think you are not looking. Second, I need your verbal confirmation to execute the final steps of our financial strategy." Vivian swallowed hard, stepping toward the phone. "Elijah." "Please," Vivian pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. "You know how Kendra gets. She is jealous. She has always been jealous of Tasha. She is having a mental breakdown and forging bank documents. Do not listen to her." I ignored my mother completely, focusing entirely on the glowing piece of technology on the table. "As your legally appointed power of attorney and the sole named executor of your estate, I am advising we permanently freeze the temporary liquidity channels we left open for Vivian." I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. The words hit the dining room like a tactical missile. Vivian's knees physically buckled. She caught herself on the back of Tasha's chair, her knuckles turning stark white. Tasha stopped crying altogether, her jaw dropping open in absolute stunned horror. Even Connor, standing by the wall, let out a sharp, audible breath. Power of attorney, sole named executor. They had spent years operating under the delusional assumption that Vivian held the keys to the kingdom. Vivian had spent 3 decades acting as the gatekeeper, parading her status at the country club, assuming she would automatically inherit control of the Vance empire because she was the compliant, doting daughter-in-law. She thought she was next in line for the throne. She thought she could pull the strings and cut me out of the family wealth with a single phone call. She had absolutely no idea that I already owned the strings. "You," Vivian whispered, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. "He gave it to you." "Yes, Vivian," I replied, my voice dripping with cold, hard truth. "Did you honestly think a billionaire entrusts his life's work to a woman who takes out secret second mortgages to bail out a fraudulent tech bro? Did you think he would hand his empire over to a granddaughter who treats his wealth like a personal slush fund? He chose the woman who knows how to multiply capital, not the ones who only know how to incinerate it. I have been managing his entire portfolio for the last 2 years. I am the sole executor. I am the gatekeeper. And you just spent the last hour threatening to disinherit the one person who actually signs your checks." I looked back down at the phone. "Grandpa, I have the audited statements right here." Vivian leveraged her primary residence to funnel $300,000 into Connor's bankrupt company. They tried to hide the transaction through a dummy LLC to avoid your oversight. They planned to use Tasha's trust distribution on Monday to quietly cover their tracks. But since I already filed your digital signature on the trust restructuring order this afternoon, they are completely exposed. Tasha is getting $2,000 a month. Connor is broke. And Vivian is about to lose this house to the bank. There was a long, dreadful pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched out, agonizing and thick. Vivian was practically hyperventilating, her eyes darting wildly around the room, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. Tasha was staring at me like I was a monster, a predator who had just systematically dismantled her entire universe without breaking a sweat. Connor pushed himself off the wall. "Mr. Vance." Connor stammered, his voice cracking. "Mr. Vance, I can explain the restructuring of my company. The market shifted unexpectedly and we had to pivot our core deliverables. It was a temporary setback. I am on the verge of a massive breakthrough. Do not insult my intelligence by speaking to me, Connor." Elijah said, his voice dripping with absolute lethal contempt. "You are a fraud. You are a parasite who convinced my foolish daughter-in-law to set her own house on fire to keep you warm. And you have the sheer audacity to stand in a house paid for by my money and disrespect the only intelligent, competent woman in this entire family. You called Kendra an angry single mother. You tried to patronize the woman who holds your entire pathetic financial existence in the palm of her hand. Connor's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was completely neutered, stripped of all his unearned confidence, and forced to face the brutal reality of his own insignificance. Elijah. Vivian cried out, tears finally spilling over her expertly applied makeup. Please, I was just trying to protect them. I was trying to keep the family together. You have to understand. I understand perfectly, Vivian Elijah replied, his voice cold and unforgiving. I understand that you raised a daughter who thinks it is acceptable to abandon my great-granddaughter in a public space. I understand that you fostered an environment of toxic entitlement. And I understand that you have been actively conspiring to steal from my estate to cover up your own profound failures. Elijah, please. Tasha begged, her voice a pathetic whisper. I am done listening to excuses. Elijah stated, his tone shifting into an absolute, unquestionable command. Kendra has full unilateral authority over every single asset bearing the Vance name. Her decisions are my decisions. Her word is law. I stood tall, looking at the three people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They were completely broken, stripped of their leverage, their money, and their arrogant delusions. They had nothing left. I will handle the asset freezes immediately, Grandpa, I said, my voice calm and professional. I will let you get back to your evening in Aspen. Have a good Thanksgiving. There was a brief pause on the line. I heard the faint sound of a car engine running in the background. I am not in Aspen. Kendra, Elijah said, his deep voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. I diverted the jet 2 hours ago when you sent me the initial bank audit. The color completely vanished from Vivian's face. Vivian! Tasha. Elijah growled, his voice vibrating through the speakerphone. Stay exactly where you are. I am 5 minutes away. The metallic click of the call disconnecting echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. I slowly reached out and picked up my phone, sliding it back into my pocket with deliberate slowness. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. It lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the entire carefully constructed illusion of my family completely shattered. Tasha was the first to break. The manicured hands that had been clutching her face suddenly flew to her chest as she let out a jagged, wet gasp. Her breath hitched, turning into rapid, shallow pants. She was hyperventilating, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. The reality of Grandpa Elijah pulling into the driveway in 5 minutes had finally pierced through her lifelong bubble of entitlement. She was about to face the one man on earth who could not be manipulated by her tears. But before Tasha could even formulate a coherent sentence, Connor turned on her. The polished tech executive mask was entirely gone. He looked like a rabid dog. He lunged toward the dining table, slamming both of his hands down onto the mahogany surface so hard the silverware jumped. Are you kidding me right now? Connor screamed, spitting the words directly at his wife and my mother. He ignored me completely, focusing all of his venom on the 2 women who had just ruined his financial safety net. A $2,000 a month allowance. Are you completely insane, Tasha? You told me that trust fund was guaranteed. You told me we were walking away with $500,000 free and clear. Connor, please, Tasha choked out, backing away from the table and tripping over the leg of her dining chair. She caught herself on the edge of the credenza, her chest heaving. It is not my fault. Kendra set me up. She manipulated him. Do not play the victim with me. Connor roared, his face inches from hers. You lied to me. Both of you lied to me. He whipped his head toward Vivian, who was still pinned against the china cabinet, looking absolutely terrified. You remortgaged your house, Connor shouted, his voice cracking with pure unhinged rage. You tied my corporate debts to your personal real estate without telling me the money was domestic. Do you realize what you have done? You have exposed my entire operation. When the bankruptcy courts find out you funneled domestic equity into an insolvent limited liability company, they are going to audit everything. They are going to tear through my personal accounts. You stupid, arrogant women have handed the federal government everything they need to come after me for fraud. I was trying to save you, Vivian cried out, her voice shrill and defensive. She pressed her hands against her temples, shaking her head frantically. I gave you $300,000 of my own equity, Connor. I risked everything I built to keep you out of prison and to keep my daughter in her country club lifestyle. How dare you speak to me like this in my own home? Your home. Connor let out a harsh, barking laugh, throwing his hands in the air. This is not your home anymore, Vivian. You just heard the woman pulling the strings. You are defaulting on the mortgage. The bank is going to take this house. You have nothing. You are a broke, pathetic widow pretending to be rich, and you dragged me down with you. Vivian let out a wounded sob, sliding down the front of the china cabinet until she hit the floor. Her emerald silk blouse crumpled as she buried her face in her knees. The matriarch who had spent my entire life dictating terms and destroying my self-esteem was suddenly reduced to a weeping mess on the hardwood floor. The sight of our mother collapsing completely unhinged Tasha. The hyperventilating escalated into full-blown panic. She looked at Connor, who was pacing the floor and running his hands through his hair, muttering curses under his breath. She looked at Vivian sobbing on the floor. And then she looked toward the grand entryway. I have to go. Tasha stammered, her eyes wide and unfocused. I cannot be here. I cannot face him. He is going to kill me. He is going to take the cars. He is going to take everything. She lunged toward the hallway, her expensive heels slipping wildly on the polished wood. She scrambled to the antique coat rack near the front door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp the fabric of her tailored camel hair coat. She ripped it off the hook, bringing a heavy wooden hanger crashing down to the floor. She snatched her designer handbag from the console table, fumbling blindly for her car keys. Tasha, stop! Connor yelled from the dining room, not making a single move to actually help her. Where do you think you are going? If you run now, you look incredibly guilty. We have to formulate a story before the old man walks through that door. We have to get our timeline straight. There is no story, Connor. Tasha screamed back, tears streaming down her blotchy face. Kendra has the bank statements. She has the credit card bills. She knows about the Target incident. It is over. We are completely ruined. I am not staying here to be screamed at by a billionaire. She grabbed her keys, pulling them from the depths of her leather bag. Her hand reached out for the heavy brass knob of the front door. She was fully prepared to abandon her mother, her husband, and every shred of accountability, just like she had abandoned my daughter in that warehouse. I moved. I did not run, and I did not rush. I simply stepped out of the dining room and walked with total measured authority into the grand entryway. Just as Tasha's fingers wrapped around the cold brass of the doorknob, I stepped directly into her path. I planted my feet firmly on the expensive Persian rug, squaring my shoulders and crossing my arms over my chest. I blocked the entire frame of the doorway, standing between my golden child sister and her only exit. Tasha slammed to a halt, nearly colliding with my chest. She gasped, clutching her designer bag against her like a shield. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, her makeup smeared across her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. Move, Kendra, she ordered, her voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of entitlement and pure terror. Get out of my way right now. I am leaving. You are not going anywhere, Tasha. I said, my voice a low, immovable wall. I said move! Tasha shrieked, raising her hands as if she might actually try to physically push me aside. You have done enough. You ruined my life. You stole my money. Now let me out of this house before I call the police. I let out a soft, dry laugh, tilting my head slightly. Call the police, Tasha, please. I would absolutely love to explain to the local authorities how you abandoned a 7-year-old minor in a commercial retail space this morning. I would love to show them the security footage Target pulled for me. But you and I both know you are not calling anyone. She took a step back, her chest heaving. Why are you doing this? She whispered, fresh tears spilling down her face. Just let me leave. I stared down at her, watching the absolute desperation rolling off her in waves. Because for 20 years you have run away from every single mess you have ever made, I replied, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. For 20 years, Vivian cleaned up your spills, paid off your debts, and sacrificed my future to protect yours. But Vivian's checkbook is empty now, and Grandpa Elijah is exactly 2 minutes away. I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice so only she could hear me. You are going to stand right here. You are going to look that man in the eye. And for the first time in your miserable, privileged life, you are going to face the consequences of your own actions. Tasha stared at me, her chest rising and falling in violent, erratic spasms. She looked like a bird that had just flown full speed into a plate glass window. She took one shaky step backward, her expensive leather handbag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The sheer physical dominance I held over the doorway broke the last remnants of her fight or flight response. She had nowhere to run. She was trapped in the very house she had always treated as her personal kingdom. I stepped away from the door frame, leaving it unguarded. I did not need to physically block her anymore. The psychological paralysis had fully set in. I walked slowly back into the dining room, the sharp clicks of my heels echoing in the heavy, suffocating silence. Connor had stopped pacing. He stood frozen near the shattered remains of his dignity, watching me with the wary, terrified eyes of a man waiting for the executioner to pull the lever. I ignored him. I walked directly to the chair where I had been sitting all evening and picked up my structured leather tote bag. I unzipped the main compartment with a slow, deliberate motion that drew every single eye in the room. You really thought Monday was going to be your salvation, Tasha, I said, keeping my voice conversational, almost light. You thought the calendar flipping over to your 30th birthday meant an automatic, untraceable $500,000 deposited directly into your checking account. You and Connor planned to take that money, plug the massive gaping holes in his fraudulent corporate accounts, and pretend none of this ever happened. Tasha swallowed hard, her throat bobbing visibly. She wrapped her arms around her stomach as if trying to physically hold herself together. That is how trust funds work, Kendra, she whispered, her voice cracking. It is a legally binding milestone distribution. You cannot stop it. The bank processes it automatically. I let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. It was a cold sound that made Vivian flinch where she was crumpled against the base of the china cabinet. That is how trust funds work. For trust fund babies who actually bother to read their own financial documents, I corrected her. But you never read anything, do you, Tasha? You just sign where the lawyers tell you to sign and wait for the direct deposit alert on your phone. If you had actually read the amended generation skipping trust provisions that Grandpa Elijah ordered, drafted 3 years ago, you would know that milestone distributions are no longer automatic. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, crisp manila envelope. I opened the flap and withdrew a heavy sheet of watermarked legal paper. The crest of the Vance family trust was embossed perfectly at the top. Tasha's eyes locked onto the document. Even from across the room, she recognized the heavy stock paper. It was the physical authorization form for her birthday distribution. The golden ticket she had been banking her entire survival on. The amended provisions state that any distribution over $100,000 requires 2 physical signatures before the banking institution will release the capital. I explained, holding the document by the edges so the overhead chandelier light caught the watermark. The first signature belongs to the primary grantor. I turned the paper slightly, showing her the bottom right corner. Grandpa Elijah signed his portion of this authorization 2 weeks ago. He trusted the system he put in place. He assumed that if you reached this milestone without embarrassing the family name, the money was rightfully yours. Connor took a step forward, his eyes practically glued to the paper. His breathing was shallow. That piece of paper was the only thing standing between him and a federal indictment for defrauding his investors. But the bank still needs the second signature. I continued, my voice dropping into a deadly, razor-sharp cadence. The second signature belongs to the legally appointed executor of the estate, the person tasked with ensuring the beneficiary is acting in good faith and sound financial standing. The person tasked with protecting the Vance capital from being funneled into dummy limited liability companies to cover up real estate fraud. I looked dead into Tasha's terrified, bloodshot eyes. I am the executor, Tasha. I hold the pen. Please, Kendra. Tasha begged, her knees physically trembling. She took a step toward me, her hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Please do not do this. If that money does not clear on Monday, Connor is going to prison. The SEC is already asking questions. We will lose the cars. We will lose our house. I will have nothing. I am your sister. You cannot just destroy me. I looked at the weeping, pathetic woman standing in front of me. This was the same woman who had laughed when she mocked my career. This was the same woman who had happily abandoned my 7-year-old daughter in a warehouse filled with thousands of strangers just so she could go look at luxury purses. She did not care about family. She only cared about her own comfort. You destroyed yourself, Tasha, I said quietly. I am simply refusing to fund the wreckage. I gripped the top of the heavy watermarked paper with both hands. I did not break eye contact with my sister. I pulled my hands in opposite directions. The sound of the thick legal paper tearing in half was the loudest noise in the room. It was a crisp, violent rip that echoed off the dining room walls. Tasha let out a blood-curdling scream. No, I stacked the two torn halves on top of each other and ripped them again. I tore her financial salvation into quarters, the heavy paper resisting slightly before giving way under my grip. I let the torn pieces flutter from my hands, watching them drift down to land silently on the expensive Persian rug at my feet. Connor let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall and sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, his hands gripping his hair in absolute defeat. The gravy train was officially dead. The money was gone. It was the ultimate, undeniable reality check, and the sheer finality of it completely shattered whatever fragile mental barrier Vivian was hiding behind. My mother, who had been sitting paralyzed against the china cabinet, suddenly scrambled forward. She crawled across the hardwood floor on her hands and knees, the luxurious silk of her blouse catching on the carpet as she dragged herself toward me. She did not bother trying to stand. She stayed on the floor, dropping directly at my feet. She reached out her trembling hands, wrapping around my ankles. Her manicured fingers dug into my skin with a desperate, frantic strength. "Kendra, please," Vivian sobbed. Her face tilted up toward me, completely stained with tears and ruined makeup. She looked entirely broken, stripped of the arrogant matriarch persona she had worn like armor for 30 years. "You have to fix this," Vivian pleaded, her voice a hysterical, breathless rasp. "You have to call the bank. You have to print another form. We are your family, Kendra. We are your blood. Blood is thicker than money. You cannot let him walk in here and take everything away from us. I am your mother. You have to protect us. You have to tell Elijah it was all a mistake before he walks through that front door." I looked down at the woman clutching my ankles. Vivian was practically unrecognizable. Her perfectly styled hair was sticking to her damp cheeks, and her expensive emerald silk blouse was wrinkled and twisted. Her fingernails were digging into my skin with the frantic, terrifying grip of a drowning woman trying to pull someone else under the water with her. She was sobbing loudly, the sound echoing off the high ceilings of the dining room. "We are blood," Vivian repeated, her voice a wet, desperate rasp. "You cannot do this to your own blood, Kendra. You have to call the bank right now. You have to fix this. I am your mother. You have to forgive us." I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I reached down and methodically pried her trembling fingers off my legs one by one. I stepped back, smoothing the fabric of my trousers with absolute terrifying calm. "Blood is thicker than money," I repeated, letting the sheer absurdity of her words hang in the heavy air of the dining room. "You have a phenomenal amount of nerve using that word right now, Vivian. Blood did not keep my 7-year-old daughter safe when she was wandering alone through a commercial warehouse today," I stated, my voice cutting through her sobs like a serrated blade. I turned my gaze toward Tasha, who was still pressed against the doorway, clutching her designer bag like a shield. "Your blood relative over there decided that looking at imported Italian leather was more important than the safety of a child. She abandoned her. And when I confronted you about it, you laughed. You told me I was overreacting." I looked back down at Vivian, who was still huddled on the floor. "And do not dare talk to me about family loyalty or financial support. Blood watched me work 3 minimum-wage jobs during college. I was pulling double shifts at a diner, smelling like grease and bleach, and scrubbing floors just to pay for my textbooks. I begged you for a loan to cover my tuition for 1 single semester. You told me you did not have the liquidity. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, forcing her to look up at me. But you found the liquidity the very next week, did you not? You quietly wrote a cash check for an $80,000 Mercedes for Tasha because she was feeling stressed about her midterm exams. You bought her a luxury vehicle while I was eating instant ramen and riding the city bus at midnight. Vivian shook her head, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to formulate an excuse. I was trying to build your character, Kendra. I wanted you to be independent. You wanted me to fail, I corrected her immediately, shutting down the lie. You wanted me to come crawling back and beg for your approval so you could control me the same way you control her. But I did not fail. I climbed the corporate ladder. I built my own wealth. And I did it while you and Tasha sat at the country club spending money you did not earn and laughing at my expense. Connor let out a miserable groaning sound from his spot on the floor. He was staring at the ripped pieces of the trust authorization form scattered across the Persian rug. He was finally realizing that he had spent years kissing up to the wrong side of the family tree. He had married the golden child thinking it was a guaranteed payday, but he had vastly underestimated the quiet scapegoat. You have to forgive us, Kendra, Vivian cried out, clasping her hands together in a pathetic praying motion. It is Thanksgiving. Family forgives family. If you let Elijah walk through that door and destroy us, you are destroying yourself. You will carry that guilt for the rest of your life. You have to be the bigger person. You have to let this go. I stared at her, watching the ultimate toxic manipulation unfold. It was the exact same script she had used for 30 years. Whenever they crossed a line, whenever they caused irreparable damage, they expected me to simply swallow my anger and forgive them to keep the peace. They demanded endless grace while offering absolutely none in return. I am not playing that game anymore, Vivian, I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality. I do not forgive you. I am not going to be the bigger person. You do not get to emotionally abuse me for 3 decades, steal from the family estate, mock my career, endanger my child, and then demand unconditional forgiveness the absolute second I hold the power. Tasha let out a loud, dramatic sob, pressing her back against the doorframe. Kendra, please. I am sorry. I will apologize to Aaliyah. I will do whatever you want. Just print another form. You are not sorry, Tasha, I replied, not even bothering to look at her. You are just terrified of being poor. There is a massive fundamental difference. You are sorry that you got caught. You are sorry that the bank is going to repossess that diamond tennis bracelet on your wrist. But you are not sorry for what you actually did. The dining room felt like a graveyard. The luxurious surroundings, the crystal glasses, the expensive floral centerpieces, they all stood in stark contrast to the absolute ruin of the people inhabiting the space. Vivian was a broken, weeping mess on the floor. Connor was practically catatonic, staring at the wall. Tasha was trapped, hyperventilating by the front door. You chose this, I told them, my voice ringing out in the quiet house. Every single lie you told, every dollar you tried to hide, every time you looked down on me because I worked for a living. You built this exact moment brick by brick. I am just the one delivering the final receipt. Vivian opened her mouth to beg again, to offer some new desperate plea for salvation. But the words never left her throat. Outside the dining room windows, the distinct, heavy crunch of tires rolling over the gravel driveway shattered the silence. The sound was slow, methodical, and heavy. A vehicle had just pulled up directly in front of the house. Tasha gasped, spinning around to look through the sheer curtains covering the sidelight windows of the front door. Her entire body went rigid. The blood drained so quickly from her face she looked like a ghost. No one moved. No one breathed. Then came the sound. It started with the heavy metallic click of the front door unlocking. The solid oak door swung open with a slow, agonizing creak, and then the rhythmic, heavy thud of a solid wooden cane striking the polished hardwood floor echoed through the grand entryway. Thud, step, thud, step. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. The air became instantly suffocating heavy with a terrifying, undeniable presence. The time for begging was over. The time for excuses had officially run out. Grandpa Elijah had arrived. The heavy oak door swung wide open, revealing the imposing silhouette of Elijah Vance. He stepped over the threshold, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He was 82 years old, but he carried himself with the lethal grace of a much younger man. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders, and his grip on the polished silver head of his mahogany cane was bone white with suppressed fury. Right behind him stepped Harrison, his personal attorney of 20 years, a man whose presence usually meant someone was about to lose their company. Harrison carried a thick leather briefcase and wore an expression of absolute predatory neutrality. Tasha was standing inches from Elijah, having just tried to escape. She pressed her spine against the doorframe, her eyes wide with terror, trying to make herself invisible. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling as if she wanted to offer a greeting or an apology. Elijah did not even look at her. He walked right past his golden granddaughter, as if she were nothing more than a piece of cheap furniture cluttering his entryway. He stepped into the dining room. The sharp strike of his cane against the floorboard sounded like a metronome counting down their final seconds of luxury. Vivian was still kneeling on the Persian rug, her hands resting on her thighs. Her tear-streaked face turned upward in a mask of pure, desperate hope. She thought he was here to save her. She actually believed her status as his late son's wife still carried weight. Elijah walked right past her. He did not offer her a glance. He did not acknowledge her weeping or her ruined silk blouse. He bypassed the wreckage of the dining room entirely and walked straight toward me. The fierce, terrifying storm in his dark eyes softened for exactly one fraction of a second when he looked at me. "Where is my great-granddaughter Kendra?" he asked, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that completely commanded the space. "She is perfectly safe, Grandpa," I replied, maintaining my professional posture, but allowing the tension to drain from my shoulders. "She is upstairs in the guest bedroom watching a movie with her noise-canceling headphones on. She is completely insulated from this mess. She does not know what happened today, and she never will." Elijah gave a single sharp nod of approval. "You did well, Kendra. You protected the bloodline. You secured the perimeter. That is exactly why I trusted you with the keys to the kingdom." He reached out and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, giving it a firm, reassuring squeeze. It was the ultimate validation, the absolute confirmation of everything I had worked for. He had not come here to mediate. He had not come here to hear both sides. He had come here to stand beside his appointed general. Then Elijah Vance turned around to face the room. The momentary warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial, absolute rage that seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the dining room. He leaned his weight onto his silver-tipped cane and let his gaze sweep over the pathetic scene. He looked at Connor, who was cowering against the far wall. He looked at Tasha, who was still trembling by the front door. Finally, his eyes locked onto Vivian, who was staring up at him from the floor. "Elijah," Vivian gasped, her voice a wet, wretched sound. She pushed herself up slightly, reaching a hand out toward him. "Elijah, thank God you are here. You have to understand. Kendra is twisting everything. It was a massive miscommunication. Tasha just got confused at the store. And the bank loan was just a temporary bridge to help Connor with his corporate restructuring. I was going to pay it back. I am your family, Elijah. I am your daughter-in-law. You have to listen to me." Silence. Elijah did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He simply uttered that single word with such devastating, absolute authority that Vivian snapped her mouth shut so fast her teeth clicked. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "You do not speak to me, Vivian," Elijah said, his voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal intensity. "You do not address me. You do not attempt to justify your profound incompetence. You sit on that floor and you listen to the consequences of your actions." Vivian shrank back, pulling her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around her legs. She looked like a terrified child, but there was absolutely no pity in Elijah's eyes. He had tolerated her shallow country club existence for decades out of respect for his late son, but she had finally crossed the unforgivable line. I spent the entire flight from Aspen reviewing the financial audits Kendra forwarded to my secure server. Elijah began slowly pacing across the edge of the dining room, his cane thudding rhythmically. I looked at the dummy limited liability company you set up. I looked at the second mortgage you fraudulently attached to this property. I looked at the massive criminal liability you invited into my family just to prop up this pathetic excuse for a businessman. He pointed his cane directly at Connor. Connor flinched, pressing his back harder against the wall. "You thought you could outsmart me, boy," Elijah asked, his voice dripping with disgust. "You thought you could marry my granddaughter and use her trust fund to plug the holes in your sinking ship. You are not a pioneer. You are a common thief wearing an expensive suit. And my daughter-in-law was stupid enough to hand you the matches to burn her own house down." Connor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Mr. Vance, I assure you the intellectual property my company holds is highly valuable. If we just have a little more time." "You have no time," Elijah cut him off, the words slicing through the air like a guillotine. "You have exactly 0 hours and 0 seconds. Kendra has frozen the liquidity channels. The capital is gone. The federal authorities will be notified of your fraudulent equity transfers the second the banks open on Monday morning. You are going to federal prison, Connor, and you are going to go there broke." Connor closed his eyes, his head falling back against the wall in total defeat. He knew it was over. There was no talking his way out of a corner painted by Elijah Vance. But financial ruin is simply a matter of bad business. Elijah continued, turning his attention away from Connor and fixing his dark, furious gaze onto Tasha. "What you did today, Tasha, goes far beyond bad business. What you did today is a fundamental failure of human decency." Tasha let out a choked sob, sliding her back down the doorframe until she was sitting on the floor in the entryway, clutching her knees. "Grandpa, please," she wept. "I just forgot. I was stressed. I did not mean to leave her." "You did not forget," Elijah said, his voice rising in volume for the first time, the sheer power of it making the crystal glasses on the table vibrate. "You made a choice. You looked at a helpless 7-year-old child, a child who shares your blood, a child who trusted you to keep her safe, and you decided that your own shallow, narcissistic desires were more important. You walked away from her. You abandoned her in a crowded warehouse so you could go look at pieces of dyed leather." Tasha buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." "Your apologies are as worthless as your character," Tasha Elijah fired back, stepping closer to her. "Do you have any idea what it took to build this family? Do you have any earthly idea what kind of sacrifices paid for that designer coat you are wearing?" He slammed his cane against the floor, the sound cracking like thunder. "I did not inherit a trust fund. I was born in the Jim Crow South. I was born in a dirt floor cabin where the roof leaked every time it rained. I shined shoes for men who called me boy and looked at me like I was an animal. I worked myself to the bone. I bled for every single dollar I made. I built this empire through systemic hatred, through redlining, through banks that refused to look me in the eye. I built it so my descendants would never have to bow their heads to anyone. I built it so my family would be strong, untouchable, and fiercely loyal to our own blood." Elijah was breathing heavily now, the raw emotion of his past bleeding into the present. He stared down at Tasha and Vivian with a look of absolute revulsion. "And what did my wealth buy?" he asked, his voice dropping back down to a dangerous whisper. "It bought weakness. It bought entitlement. It bought a mother who mortgages her home for a criminal, and a granddaughter who abandons a child for a purse. You have taken my legacy and turned it into a grotesque display of greed and incompetence." He turned back to look at Vivian, who was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. "You told Kendra that blood is thicker than money," Vivian Elijah stated, repeating the exact manipulation she had tried to use earlier. "You told her she had to forgive you because you are family. You thought you could use the concept of family as a shield to avoid accountability." He stepped back, leaning his weight on his cane, his posture rigid and commanding. "You abandoned my blood in a parking lot because of your own pathetic insecurities," Elijah declared, his voice echoing with absolute terrifying finality. "You conspired to steal my blood's hard-earned wealth to cover up your crimes. You are no longer my blood. You are no longer my family. You are nothing but liabilities, and I am liquidating you today." Elijah did not even turn his head. He simply lifted 2 fingers in the air, signaling the man standing silently in the entryway. Harrison. The attorney stepped forward with the smooth, silent efficiency of a predator. He walked into the dining room, unzipping his heavy leather briefcase as he moved. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at Tasha. He simply reached into the bag and pulled out a thick bound stack of legal documents. Harrison stepped up to the mahogany dining table. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he dropped the heavy stack of freshly printed documents right onto the center of the table. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the wood sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. "These are your eviction notices," Elijah stated, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. "These are the formal declarations, severing you from the Vance family trust, removing you from the estate properties, and revoking your access to all family credit lines. You have 24 hours to vacate this property before the bank seizes it. You will leave with exactly what you brought into this family. Nothing." I did not even look back as I crossed the grand entryway. I walked straight past the heavy oak front door and moved toward the sweeping mahogany staircase. The hysterical sobbing of my mother and sister echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the dining room, sounding like nothing more than distant background noise. I climbed the stairs with slow, even steps, my hand trailing along the polished banister. The air seemed to grow lighter the higher I went, leaving the toxic, suffocating atmosphere of my childhood entirely behind me. I opened the door to the guest bedroom. Aaliyah was lying on her stomach across the plush duvet, her legs kicked up behind her. She had her oversized noise-canceling headphones perfectly positioned over her ears, completely absorbed in the animated movie playing on the tablet screen in front of her. She looked up when the door opened, and a bright, innocent smile spread across her face. She had absolutely no idea that the foundation of our entire extended family had just been permanently leveled downstairs. She had been completely insulated from the collateral damage. I tapped my wrist and smiled, indicating it was time to go. Aaliyah nodded, pulling off her headphones and slipping her small hand into mine. We walked out of the bedroom and descended the grand staircase together. When we reached the bottom floor, the wailing from the dining room had devolved into sharp, desperate arguments. Connor was yelling at Tasha. Vivian was crying for Elijah. I did not pause to listen. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, holding my daughter's hand tightly as we walked directly out the front door. The crisp autumn air hit my face the second we stepped onto the porch. It was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. It smelled like absolute freedom. I buckled Aaliyah into the back seat of my car, started the engine, and drove away from the sprawling estate without checking my rearview mirror a single time. 3 months passed. The silence that followed that explosive Thanksgiving night was the most profound and peaceful period of my entire life. I did not receive any more demanding text messages. I did not get summoned to degrading Sunday dinners. The toxic tether had been completely severed, and without my grandfather throwing his money to shield them, my family faced the brutal, unyielding reality of their own incompetence. The downfall was rapid and absolute. Connor was the first to cut his losses. The second he realized the $500,000 trust distribution was dead, he filed for divorce. He knew Tasha was entirely useless to him without her grandfather's bank account. The divorce papers were served to her less than 48 hours after our Thanksgiving dinner. But Connor's ruthless pragmatism did not save him. Without the massive injection of domestic capital to cover his tracks, the federal authorities descended on his tech company like vultures. The Securities and Exchange Commission raided his corporate offices, seizing his servers and freezing his remaining personal assets. He is currently awaiting a federal indictment for defrauding his investors and the very real possibility of a 10-year prison sentence. Tasha was left with absolutely nothing. Without Connor paying the mortgage on their luxury suburban home and without Vivian to bail her out, she was immediately unmoored. Her luxury vehicles were repossessed within weeks. She tried to maintain her socialite facade, running up her credit cards to buy designer clothes and expensive lunches just to keep up appearances with her wealthy friends. But the credit cards bounced, and the friends vanished the second they realized she could not pick up the tab. The golden child who had spent her entire life looking down on everyone else is currently sleeping on a lumpy futon in the cramped apartment of a former sorority sister because she has zero marketable skills and a resume that consists entirely of shopping. Vivian suffered the steepest fall of all. True to my word, I executed the 30-day eviction notice with absolute precision. She spent the first 2 weeks living in deep denial, convinced that Elijah would eventually calm down and reverse his decision. She tried calling his private lines, showing up at his corporate offices, and leaving hysterical voicemails with his attorneys. She was ignored completely. When the reality finally set in, she tried to leverage her extensive network of country club friends. She hosted luncheons and tearfully explained that her family was going through a minor financial restructuring, hoping one of her wealthy peers would offer her a guest house or a substantial loan. Instead, they shut her out. The high society circle she had sacrificed my entire childhood to impress proved to be exactly as shallow as I always knew they were. The moment they realized she was completely cut off from the Vance family wealth, they stopped returning her calls. They uninvited her from charity galas and blocked her on social media. On the 30th day, the local sheriff arrived at the estate. Vivian was forced to pack whatever clothes she could fit into her suitcases and walk out the front door. The woman who had spent 30 years parading around in emerald silk and dictating terms from her mahogany dining table was forced into a tiny, cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a cheap neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. She has low ceilings, peeling linoleum floors, and absolutely no one to manipulate. She is completely isolated, living in the exact poverty she used to mock me for enduring. I do not feel a single drop of guilt. I do not wonder how they are doing, and I do not check up on them. They are strangers to me now. I sat back in my plush leather chair, taking a long sip of my morning coffee. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, illuminating the sleek glass desk and the polished wood accents of the room. I had a panoramic view of the downtown skyline, the bustling city moving steadily far below me. I was the executive director of the subsidiary holding company, managing a massive portfolio of commercial real estate and generational wealth. I held the keys. I held the power. I reached out and adjusted the silver picture frame sitting on the corner of my desk. It was a candid photograph taken just last week. Grandpa Elijah was sitting in a comfortable armchair, looking stronger and more relaxed than I had seen him in years. He was smiling a genuine, rare smile as he watched Aaliyah painting a picture at an easel in his private garden. Aaliyah is thriving. She is taking advanced art classes, learning to ride horses on the weekends, and growing into a confident, brilliant little girl. She does not flinch when adults enter the room. She does not apologize for taking up space. She will never know the feeling of being abandoned in a crowded store, and she will never understand the crushing weight of conditional love. She is safe, and she is deeply, genuinely loved. I looked at the photograph and let the profound reality of my current life wash over me. Breaking a generational curse is not about screaming louder than your abusers. It is not about throwing tantrums or demanding apologies from people who are fundamentally incapable of self-reflection. Breaking a toxic cycle requires discipline. It requires the emotional detachment to look at the people who share your DNA and recognize them for exactly what they are. Vivian and Tasha believed that family meant limitless tolerance for their cruelty. They believed that because we shared blood, I was obligated to absorb their insults, fund their mistakes, and shrink myself down so they could feel tall. They demanded toxic forgiveness because it was the only way they could avoid accountability. They expected me to stay in the exact box they built for me. They thought I would stay in my place because they demanded it. They thought I would remain the quiet, reliable punching bag forever. They completely forgot that while they were busy playing cheap family politics, arguing over designer purses and country club gossip, I was busy mastering the board. I was doing the work. I was reading the documents. I was building the discipline required to actually govern the empire they felt so entitled to. I picked up my gold pen, preparing to sign off on the morning portfolio acquisitions. A deep sense of absolute, unshakable peace settled over my chest. I had protected my daughter, I had secured my future, and I had finally burned the toxic bridge to my past. They wanted me to be the scapegoat. I chose to be the owner. The most profound lesson from this ordeal is that a shared bloodline does not automatically guarantee loyalty, love, or mutual respect. True security never comes from waiting for toxic relatives to finally recognize your worth. It comes from silently building your own foundation, mastering your financial independence, and finding the unwavering courage to sever ties with those who consistently exploit you. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept, but it must never become a mandatory requirement for people who constantly choose their own selfish comfort over your safety and well-being. You possess the absolute right to protect your peace and walk away. Share your own experiences with setting firm family boundaries in the comments below, and please hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories about reclaiming your life.